The dense, green jungles of Felvora stretched endlessly in every direction, a vibrant landscape full of towering trees and dangerous creatures. Illyria, a Felvorian, moved swiftly between the shadows of the trees, her sharp feline eyes watching for any signs of movement. She was used to hunting, to surviving. But this time, she wasn't the hunter. She had been captured. The human, a strange creature she had never seen before, had surprised her. The Felvorians had long feared humans, believing them to be bloodthirsty predators who roamed the stars, devouring anything in their path. Illyria had heard the stories, the whispers of what humans did when they found other species. Her people spoke of their cruelty, their endless hunger, and their terrifying technology. But this human, he was different. He had taken her without a fight, quickly and with little effort, though she had struggled. His name was Captain Jonas Reed, according to the strange symbols on his uniform. He had knocked her out with some sort of device she didn't understand, and when she woke up, she found herself bound to a seat in a small metal cage. Her first instinct was to claw her way out, but she had quickly realized that the cage was stronger than she had anticipated. It wasn't made of any material she knew. Jonas hadn't said a word when she woke up. He had simply watched her from the other side of the cage, his expression calm but curious. Illyria snarled at him, a low growl rising in her chest, her fur bristling in anger and fear. She had no idea what this human wanted from her, but she knew it couldn't be good. They never took prisoners for kind reasons. But then something strange happened. Jonas reached into a small pack at his side and pulled out a piece of food. It didn't look like anything Illyria had ever seen before. It wasn't meat, and it wasn't anything from Felvora's jungles. Instead, it looked like a small flat disc, and when he held it out to her through the bars of the cage, Illyria recoiled, suspicious. "Are you hungry?" Jonas asked, his voice soft but clear. Illyria stared at him. The idea that this human might be offering food that wasn't meant to trap or poison her, seemed almost impossible to believe. She had heard stories of humans eating whole species, of how they consumed anything and everything they encountered. Why would he offer her food? Why would he try to be kind? Her instincts told her to refuse, to never trust the human, but she was hungry. The long days of running from predators and surviving on the little food she could find had drained her. Slowly, cautiously, she leaned forward and sniffed the strange offering. It smelled edible, safe. Her stomach growled, betraying her. She looked up at Jonas again, still unsure. "I won't hurt you," Jonas said, his tone genuine. "You don't have to be afraid." Illyria couldn't believe it. This human was different. Maybe it was the hunger, or maybe it was the weariness of her endless fight for survival, but something made her take the piece of food from his hand. She sniffed it again, then hesitantly took a small bite. To her surprise, it tasted good, much better than the wild fruits and meats of Felvora. The texture was soft, and it was flavored in a way she couldn't quite understand. She chewed slowly, still suspicious but unable to deny the hunger that was being satisfied. Jonas watched her, his eyes not filled with malice, but with something Illyria hadn't expected. Compassion. He didn't seem like a monster. He wasn't the predator she had been warned about. Instead, he seemed calm, even kind. This was the human, the one her people feared. Yet in this moment, he felt like a stranger, a mystery she couldn't solve. Her mind raced. What was his plan? Why wasn't he doing what all the stories said humans would do? Why wasn't he devouring her or using her for some cruel experiment? She looked at the food in her hands, the small piece of whatever it was, then back at Jonas. He hadn't asked her to perform any task. He wasn't demanding anything. He was simply waiting, as if giving her space to decide. Illyria felt a pang of confusion. Was he testing her? Or had she been wrong all along about humans? The idea felt foreign, even frightening. Her entire life, she had been taught to fear them, to treat every human as an enemy. But here she was, in the presence of a human who didn't want to harm her, who wasn't interested in her flesh. The question swirled in her mind, unanswered. But there was one thing she knew for sure. This wasn't the kind of encounter she had imagined. It was something different, and for the first time, Illyria wasn't sure if she had been wrong about everything. Jonas sat down quietly on a small bench nearby. He didn't try to speak further, and he didn't push her. He simply waited. Illyria finished the food slowly, then sat back against the bars of her cage. She was still unsure, still filled with doubt, but her curiosity began to grow. Why wasn't he like the others? Why wasn't he threatening? This human, this Captain Jonas Reed, had done the opposite of what she expected. And for the first time, Illyria wondered if maybe, just maybe, her people had been wrong about humans all along. The days that followed Illyria's capture were filled with confusion. Every day, she found herself locked in the same small cage aboard the human ship, unsure of what would happen next. At first, she remained on edge, watching Jonas carefully. The fear that had lived in her heart since her capture had not fully left, but it was beginning to fade. She couldn't shake the strange feeling that this human, Captain Jonas Reed, wasn't what her people had described. He was different. Jonas continued to treat her with respect, something Illyria could not understand. He would bring her food every day, a strange, soft substance that somehow tasted better than anything she had ever known. It wasn't the kind of food she was used to on Felvora, but it filled her stomach, and it was warm, even when he handed it to her through the bars of her cage. "How are you feeling today?" Jonas asked one morning, his voice soft as he sat near her cage, looking at her with a calm expression. Illyria didn't know how to answer. Her people had always told her to be strong, to never show weakness in front of anyone. But this human, he didn't make her feel weak. There was no threat in his words or actions. She had expected something far worse. She simply nodded, watching him carefully. His words didn't make sense. Why did he care how she felt? The humans she had heard of only cared for themselves. They were ruthless, known for taking what they wanted, destroying anything in their way. They didn't offer kindness to prisoners. Jonas tilted his head, his brow furrowed slightly. "I know you're scared. You don't have to be. I won't hurt you." His words surprised her. Could it be possible? Could he be telling the truth? Illyria didn't answer. Instead, she turned her eyes to the window beside her, watching the stars outside. The stars always gave her comfort. They were something she understood, something constant in a world filled with unknowns. But now, even the stars seemed unfamiliar. Illyria realized that she was trapped between two worlds. The world she knew, filled with danger and survival, and this strange world where humans were not the monsters she had been warned about. Days passed, and Illyria found herself looking forward to their brief moments together. She would watch Jonas as he moved around his small ship, tending to his work, fixing strange machines, or reading from odd-looking devices that clicked and beeped. He never once raised his voice or acted with aggression. He was always calm, focused, but never cruel. One evening, Jonas sat on the ground beside her cage. He held out a small device with a screen, pushing a button that caused the screen to light up. The symbols on it were strange, but it looked like a kind of map, filled with lines and markings she didn't recognize. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, pointing to the map. "This is a map of your planet, Felvora." Illyria blinked in surprise. She had never imagined a human would have such knowledge of her world. It was as if he knew more about her home than she did. Her people had always believed humans were clueless when it came to other worlds, relying on brute force rather than understanding. But here was Jonas, showing her a map of her own planet, speaking to her like they shared a history. She growled softly, not out of anger but out of confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jonas smiled, a gentle smile that didn't reach for control or fear. "Because I want to understand. I'm not here to hurt you, Illyria. I want to learn about your people, your world. There is no reason for us to be enemies." Her mind raced. Was it possible? Could this human truly want to understand her and her people, Or was he planning something more? She couldn't trust him completely. She had been taught to be cautious, to never show weakness to an enemy. But Jonas wasn't acting like an enemy. His words didn't match the stories she had grown up with. Could he really be different? "You came to Felvora to learn?" she asked slowly, still unsure. Jonas nodded. "Yes. My mission is peaceful. I'm not here to take anything from you, and I won't harm your people. I want to know more, not just about Felvora, but about you, Illyria. You're not the first Felvorian I've met, but you're the first one I've had the chance to speak with." Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't the first Felvorian he'd met. That meant there had been others. Were they treated like she was, locked in a cage? Or had they been different? The thought made her uneasy, but it also sparked her curiosity. "Why are you different?" Illyria asked. "Why are you not like the others?" Jonas looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe the others you've met weren't ready to understand. But I believe there's always a way to build peace, to find understanding. That's why I'm here. Not to conquer, but to connect." Illyria felt something stir inside her, hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She had always known there had to be more to life than survival and fighting. She had never imagined that the key to that might lie with a human. Still, her suspicion remained. How could she fully trust him? How could she be sure that his intentions were truly as peaceful as he claimed? But as Jonas sat there, showing her the map and explaining more about his mission, Illyria found it harder to hold on to her fear. Something in her heart told her that maybe, just maybe, she was wrong about humans. Days passed, and Illyria found herself facing a strange decision. She was still locked in the small cage aboard the human ship, but her fear had started to fade. Captain Jonas Reed's kindness and calm demeanor were unlike anything she had been told to expect. He continued to offer her food, talk to her, and try to bridge the gap between their worlds. Illyria didn't know what to think. She had been taught to fear humans, to see them as cruel creatures with no regard for life. But Jonas didn't fit that image. He was unlike any human she had imagined. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the distant horizon of Felvora, Illyria found herself staring out the window of her cage. The jungle below was alive with movement, creatures moving through the trees, birds soaring high above. The beauty of her homeworld was overwhelming, even from this small metallic box. She had always felt at home in the wilds of Felvora, with its thick jungles and towering trees. It was a place of danger and survival, but also of freedom. "Are you feeling okay?" Jonas asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Illyria turned to look at him. He was sitting at the small table nearby, working on a device that beeped occasionally. His face was focused, but there was a softness in his eyes that made her feel a strange warmth. For the first time since her capture, Illyria didn't feel entirely alone. She wasn't sure if she could trust Jonas completely, but she had to admit that she didn't feel threatened by him. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice still wary. "Just thinking." Jonas nodded, not pressing her for more. He had learned not to push her, giving her the space she needed. He had noticed that, although Illyria didn't speak much, her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She was cautious, unsure, and still fearful. But there was something else there, a flicker of curiosity, something that kept her from shutting him out completely. The ship hummed quietly around them as Jonas set aside his work and stood. He walked to the cage, and, as he had done many times before, offered her a piece of food. But this time, there was something different in the way he approached her. It wasn't just the usual offer of food. It felt like an unspoken invitation to something more. "I was thinking," Jonas said, his voice gentle. "Maybe we could work together." Illyria narrowed her eyes, confused. "Work together? What do you mean?" Jonas gave a small, almost hesitant smile. "I don't want to keep you locked up like this. I don't want to keep you in a cage. I want to help you, but I can't do it alone." Illyria felt a strange stir of something in her chest. She had always been taught to survive on her own. Felvorian society valued strength and independence above all else, Asking for help was seen as a weakness. And yet, here was a human, someone she had been taught to fear, offering his help without hesitation. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her voice skeptical. "What do you want in return?" Jonas shook his head, as if the question itself confused him. "I don't want anything in return. I'm not here to take anything from you or your people. I believe there's a way to make this work. If we help each other, we both stand a better chance." Illyria's mind raced. Could she trust him? Her heart told her he was being genuine, but her instincts told her to be cautious. She had been trained to never trust anyone, especially not someone from another world. But something about Jonas made her want to believe him. Slowly, she stepped forward in the cage, hesitating just a moment before she spoke again. "What do you need me to do?" Jonas smiled, the warmth in his expression making Illyria's heart flutter unexpectedly. "I need your help to navigate Felvora. I need to understand the land, the creatures, and your people. I can't do this alone. I can't fight every battle myself." Illyria thought about it. If she agreed to help him, she would be going against everything she had been taught. Helping the human, even if it was to escape, felt wrong in some way. But at the same time, she couldn't deny that this human had shown her nothing but kindness. He hadn't hurt her. He hadn't used her for anything. In fact, he had treated her better than most Felvorians treated one another. "Fine," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll help you, but don't mistake this for trust." Jonas nodded, his smile widening. "I understand. I just want to make sure you have a choice in this. If you ever want to leave, you can. But if you're willing to help, we can make this work together." Illyria stepped closer to the bars of the cage, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to escape. The idea of working with Jonas felt strange, but it also felt like an opportunity. An opportunity to learn about this human. And maybe, just maybe, to learn something more about herself. "I'm not saying I trust you yet," Illyria said, her voice low. "But I'll give you a chance. We'll work together. For now." Jonas smiled again, his eyes filled with gratitude. "That's all I ask." And so, the fragile alliance between the Felvorian and the human began. Illyria wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. The days following Illyria's decision to help Jonas were filled with a strange sense of purpose. Each morning, she would wake up in the small metal room that had been her prison for so long, and she would begin her day with a new focus. The alliance between her and Jonas was fragile, built on trust that was still growing. But it was a start. She was helping him navigate Felvora's dangerous jungles, and in return, Jonas was teaching her things she had never known before. His technology was far beyond anything her people had ever seen, and it fascinated her. However, as the days passed, something unsettling started to happen. Jonas had been keeping an eye on the stars, monitoring something on his ship's communication system. Illyria had seen him tense up on more than one occasion as he studied the data, and she could tell that something was bothering him. One evening, as they sat together, studying the map of Felvora, Jonas suddenly turned to her with a serious expression. "I'm afraid I've just received some disturbing news," he said, his voice low. Illyria's ears perked up, sensing the change in his tone. "What is it?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Jonas looked at her, his eyes serious. "There's a group of scavengers on their way to Felvora. They're not like me. They don't want to explore or learn. They want to strip this planet of its resources, and they don't care who gets in their way." Illyria's heart skipped a beat. Scavengers. She had heard of such groups before. They were ruthless, destroying everything in their path to take whatever they could. Her people had always fought to protect their home from invaders, but this was different. She had never encountered a group like the one Jonas was describing. "Who are they?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "They're called the Ralthor," Jonas said, "a violent group of mercenaries who've been raiding planets for years. They've got ships, weapons, and technology that can cut through almost anything." They're not here to make friends. They're here to take what they want. Illyria's mind raced. The Ralthor were known throughout the galaxy, but they were nothing like the peaceful explorers Jonas had promised to be. They were destroyers, cutthroats who cared for nothing but their own gain. If they landed on Felvora, her people would be in grave danger. "How soon will they arrive?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. Jonas stood up, his face grim. "Not long. I've been tracking their ships for days. They'll be in orbit soon. If we don't act fast, they'll land and start their destruction." Illyria felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had always been taught to fight when her home was threatened, but this was something different. The Ralthor were a force to be reckoned with, and even with Jonas's advanced technology, there was no guarantee they could stop them. "Is there anything we can do?" Illyria asked. Jonas turned to her, his eyes determined. "I think there is, but I'll need your help." Illyria's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't hesitate this time. She had already made the decision to work with Jonas, and now that decision was about to be tested. The threat to her home, her people, was real. If she didn't help him, the Ralthor would destroy everything she loved. But if she did, it would mean stepping even further away from everything she had been taught. It would mean trusting a human, a being her people had always feared. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. Jonas gave her a small smile. "I'll need your knowledge of Felvora. You know the jungle better than anyone. You know where the best hiding places are, where the Ralthor would have trouble reaching. Together, we can set up traps, warn the Felvorian villages, and prepare for a defense." Illyria nodded, her mind working quickly. She knew the jungle. She knew its secrets, the hidden caves, the thick underbrush, the places where only those who truly understood the land could hide. But the Ralthor had technology. They had ships that could fly overhead, weapons that could level whole villages. It wouldn't be easy. "There's one more thing," Jonas added, his voice serious. "The Ralthor have a leader, a ruthless one. If we don't stop him, the rest of them will follow. His name is Vekar. He's the one who makes all the decisions." Illyria's blood ran cold at the mention of Vekar. She had heard stories of him. His reputation was known across the galaxy. Vekar was a monster, a being who took what he wanted without hesitation. She knew that if he set foot on Felvora, there would be no stopping him. "We'll have to be careful," Illyria said, her voice low. "The Ralthor don't take prisoners. If they come here, they won't leave until they've taken everything." Jonas looked at her, his face filled with determination. "We're not going to let that happen. We're going to stop them. Together." The weight of what they were about to face settled on Illyria's shoulders. The stakes had never been higher. She wasn't just helping Jonas anymore. She was fighting to protect her people, her world. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Something stronger. For the first time, Illyria felt like she wasn't alone. She had an ally. A human who had shown her that not all humans were the same. She didn't know if they could stop the Ralthor, but she was willing to try. "Let's prepare," she said, her voice steady. "We'll need every advantage we can get." Jonas nodded. "Then let's get to work." And so, Illyria and Jonas began their preparations. They would need all their skills, all their knowledge, to fight the coming storm. The Ralthor were on their way, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days leading up to the arrival of the Ralthor felt like a heavy weight pressing down on Illyria and Jonas. They had worked tirelessly, preparing traps and setting up hidden paths through the dense jungles of Felvora. Illyria had shared her knowledge of the land, its most dangerous creatures, its hidden caves, the thick forests that could be used to their advantage. Jonas had used his technology to enhance their defenses, setting up sensors and communication devices to track the Ralthor's movements. Despite the progress they had made, Illyria couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that hung in the air. The Ralthor were coming. They were ruthless, and their leader, Vekar, was known for his cunning. The closer they got to being ready, the more she realized that the battle ahead wouldn't just be about strategy and traps. It would be about survival. One evening, as the sky began to darken, Jonas sat by a small fire they had built. Illyria was sitting nearby, her eyes scanning the horizon, watching for any signs of the enemy. The stars above twinkled softly, their light reflecting on the calm waters of a nearby river. It was hard to believe that such peace could exist when danger was so close. Jonas broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder if we've made a mistake? I mean, working together like this. If we fail, it could cost us everything." Illyria turned to look at him. The question had been on her mind as well, but she hadn't voiced it. She had been trained to trust only her own instincts, to rely on her people and their strength. Trusting Jonas, a human, had been hard enough. And now they were about to face an enemy that could destroy everything they had worked for. But something about Jonas gave her hope. He wasn't like the humans she had been told to fear. He was different, and the more time they spent together, the more she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for a different future. A future where humans and Felvorians didn't have to be enemies. "I don't know," Illyria said honestly, her voice steady. "But I do know that if we don't fight, we'll lose everything. If we don't stand up to the Ralthor, they'll take Felvora from us. They'll destroy everything." Jonas nodded slowly. "You're right. It's just hard to ignore the fear. The Ralthor are powerful. They won't give up easily." Illyria stood up, walking toward the edge of the firelight. She stared into the dark jungle, her mind running through the plans they had made. They had set up traps, sure, but they had no way of knowing how many Ralthor were coming or what kind of weapons they would bring with them. The Felvorian villagers they had contacted were ready, but how could they be truly prepared for an enemy like this? "I know you're scared," Jonas continued, standing and joining her. "But I believe in us. I believe in you." Illyria turned to him, surprised by the warmth in his voice. She had never heard such words from anyone. Humans, in her experience, were always quick to take what they wanted, never stopping to think about the consequences. But Jonas wasn't like that. He wasn't here to take anything. He was here to help. "You believe in me?" Illyria asked, her voice quiet. Jonas met her gaze with a serious expression. "I do. I know it's hard to trust someone you've been taught to fear, but I've seen what you're capable of. I've seen your strength, your knowledge of the land. You're not just helping me, you're helping your people. And that's what makes you stronger than anyone I've ever known." Illyria felt a strange warmth in her chest at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. She had always been expected to fight and survive, to lead with strength and power. But now, for the first time, someone was telling her that there was more to her than just survival. She took a deep breath, her gaze returning to the jungle. She couldn't afford to doubt herself now. The Ralthor were coming, and there was no turning back. "Thank you," she said softly, the words coming easier than she expected. "I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that." Jonas smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Anytime. We've got this, Illyria. We'll make it through this together." The night stretched on, and the two of them sat in silence, the weight of their upcoming battle hanging between them. But for the first time, Illyria didn't feel alone. She had made a choice, and despite the uncertainty, she was ready to face what was coming. The next morning, they received the news they had been waiting for. The Ralthor were in orbit. Their ships were visible now, streaking across the sky. The time to prepare was over. The battle had begun. Illyria and Jonas moved quickly, rallying the villagers and finalizing their plans. They would use the traps they had set, the hidden paths in the jungle, and their knowledge of the land to their advantage. But they would also have to fight. And that was something Illyria had always known she would have to do. As she stood with Jonas, looking out over the horizon, Illyria made a silent promise to herself. She would protect her home, no matter the cost. She would fight for Felvora, and for a future where humans and Felvorians could stand together, not as enemies, but as allies. The storm was coming, but they would face it together. The air was thick with tension as Illyria and Jonas stood on the edge of the jungle, watching the sky. The Ralthor ships hovered above Felvora like ominous shadows, their sleek metal bodies glinting in the sun. The time had come. The battle they had been preparing for was no longer something distant in the future. It was here now. Illyria's heart raced in her chest. She had spent her entire life learning how to survive in the wilds of Felvora. But this was different. The Ralthor were unlike any enemy she had ever faced. They had technology that could tear through the jungle's thick trees, weapons capable of leveling entire villages. She glanced at Jonas, standing beside her, and for the first time, she could see the fear in his eyes too. But it wasn't just fear that they shared, it was determination. "They're close," Jonas said, his voice low but steady. He had been monitoring the Ralthor's movements from his ship's sensors. "They're coming in fast." Illyria nodded, gripping her weapon tightly. She had never held a weapon like this before. Jonas had given it to her, showing her how to use it with calm patience. It felt strange in her hands, but the feeling of power was something she couldn't ignore. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Felvora, for her people, for everything she held dear. "We have to warn the villages," Illyria said, turning toward the others who had gathered to help them. The Felvorian warriors were ready, their weapons prepared, but they needed more time. The Ralthor would not be easy to stop. Jonas nodded. "We'll send a signal. If we can warn them before the Ralthor land, maybe they can evacuate. The last thing we want is them getting caught off guard." Illyria and Jonas had set up a series of communication devices hidden deep in the jungle, designed to relay messages across vast distances. It was their best chance at getting the word out in time. "I'll stay here and monitor the ships," Jonas said. "You go. The faster you move, the better." Illyria didn't hesitate. She turned and ran into the jungle, her feet pounding against the soft earth. She knew these paths better than anyone, the hidden trails that wove through the trees like veins in the land's body. The scent of damp earth and greenery filled her senses as she sprinted, her thoughts focused only on one thing: getting to the villages before it was too late. As she ran, her mind flashed back to the first time she had seen Jonas. Her first impression of him as a human was one of fear. But now, as she dashed through the jungle, she realized how far they had come. They had become partners, each relying on the other in ways they hadn't expected. Together, they had prepared for this moment, and together, they would face it. After what felt like an eternity, Illyria arrived at the first village. The people were already on edge, whispering among themselves as they watched the sky. Illyria quickly approached the village leader, a tall Felvorian named Kel, who was already preparing his warriors. "The Ralthor are coming," Illyria said urgently. "You need to move your people to the safe zones. We don't have much time." Kel's face hardened with determination, but his eyes were filled with worry. "We knew this day might come," he said, his voice calm despite the fear in his heart. "But I didn't expect them to arrive so soon. We've been preparing, but—" Illyria cut him off. "There's no time to prepare more. You need to move now. Trust me, we'll make sure the paths are clear, but you have to act quickly." Kale nodded, signaling his warriors to begin evacuating the village. Illyria's heart raced as she watched the villagers gather their things, leaving behind their homes and everything they knew. The Ralthor had brought nothing but destruction in their wake, and if Illyria and Jonas didn't succeed, Felvora's future would be in jeopardy. With the village evacuated, Illyria quickly moved to the next. She had to warn as many people as possible. Time was slipping away, and each moment felt like a countdown. The Ralthor would soon be on the ground, ready to take what they wanted. As Illyria made her way through the jungle, Jonas's voice crackled through the communication device she carried. "Illyria, the Ralthor are landing. They're close. You need to hurry." She felt a rush of fear, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to panic now. The people of Felvora depended on her. I'm almost there, Illyria replied. Just keep an eye on them. Jonas's voice was calm but urgent. We're ready on this end. I've got a few surprises lined up for them. Illyria smiled slightly, the memory of their work together filling her with a sense of confidence. They had worked hard to set traps, using the jungle's natural obstacles to their advantage. The Ralthor might have technology, but the jungle was Illyria's home. She knew how to use it to her advantage. Finally, after hours of running, Illyria reached the last village. She could see the fear in the eyes of the people there, but they trusted her. She told them the same thing: gather their things and move quickly. With the last village evacuated, Illyria made her way back to Jonas, her heart pounding with exhaustion and anxiety. The Ralthor were here. The battle was about to begin. When she arrived at their hideout, she found Jonas waiting for her, his face serious but determined. It's time, he said. Are you ready? Illyria nodded. Let's do this. Together, they would face the Ralthor. They had prepared, they had fought, and now it was time to defend their home. The storm was finally here, but they would stand against it, united and unyielding. The massive ships touched down on the surface of Felvora with an ear-splitting roar, their engines kicking up clouds of dust and debris. Illyria could feel the ground tremble beneath her feet as the invaders made their move. The air was thick with the promise of conflict, but there was no turning back now. The people of Felvora had evacuated to the safe zones, and it was up to Illyria and Jonas to make sure the Ralthor didn't destroy their home. We're ready, Jonas said, his voice calm but firm. He was standing beside her, his weapon in hand, eyes locked on the ships that now hovered above the jungle. His technology had been set up, sensors in place to track every move the enemy made. Illyria nodded. She wasn't sure how much time they had, but it didn't matter. The jungle was their ally, and she knew it better than anyone. She turned to the group of Felvorian warriors who had joined them, their faces filled with resolve. They had been preparing for this moment, training in the ways of the jungle, setting traps and hidden paths, just like Illyria had shown them. This is it, Illyria said, her voice steady. We've worked too hard to let them take this place. We fight together, or we don't fight at all. The warriors nodded, their expressions unwavering. They were ready. Jonas spoke up again. Remember the plan. We'll draw them in, lead them to the traps. They may have technology, but they're not familiar with this terrain. We have the advantage. Illyria's heart raced, but she forced herself to focus. She had learned a lot from Jonas, not just about weapons and technology, but about strategy. It wasn't enough to fight blindly. They needed to outthink the Ralthor, to stay one step ahead of them. The first shot rang out. A loud blast echoed through the jungle, the sound of energy weapons cutting through the trees. The Ralthor were already making their move. The fight had begun. Illyria and Jonas dove into the underbrush, moving quickly but silently. The Felvorian warriors had already begun to lay down distractions, making the enemy chase them into the carefully prepared traps. Illyria's breath came in short, controlled bursts as she sprinted through the thick foliage, the jungle shadows swallowing her whole. Stay sharp, Jonas said through their communication link. They're on the move. We need to lead them right into the center. Illyria's eyes narrowed as she spotted the first group of Ralthor soldiers moving through the jungle, their heavy boots thudding against the ground. They were searching for something, their weapons raised, ready for anything. They didn't know what they were walking into. Now Illyria whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She signaled the warriors to set off the first trap. In an instant, the ground beneath the Ralthor soldiers exploded, sending a cloud of dirt and debris into the air. They scattered, confused, as Illyria and the others moved quickly to their next position. Jonas's voice crackled through her earpiece. They're disoriented. Keep pushing them in. They're falling into place. Illyria's heart pounded with a mix of fear and adrenaline. The Ralthor were strong, but they weren't used to Felvora's terrain. The jungle was alive with the sounds of battle, the clash of weapons, the cries of the Felvorian warriors, and the unrelenting hum of the Ralthor's energy guns. As Illyria moved through the jungle, she caught sight of one of the Ralthor leaders, Vekar himself. He was standing near the wreckage of a fallen tree, his eyes scanning the area. His presence was commanding, his face hard and calculating. Illyria knew that if they didn't take him out, the rest of the Ralthor would follow him without question. "This is it," she whispered to herself. She adjusted her grip on her weapon and moved forward, her every step careful and deliberate. She could feel the sweat beading on her forehead, the weight of the decision she was about to make heavy on her shoulders. But there was no room for doubt now. Vekar was the key to ending this. If they could take him down, the rest of the Ralthor would falter. With a sharp intake of breath, Illyria sprinted toward him, her body moving like a shadow through the trees. She wasn't alone. Jonas was with her, his technology guiding them as they approached their target. In one swift motion, Illyria launched herself from the shadows, her weapon raised and aimed directly at Vekar. He turned just in time to see her, but it was too late. The blast from her weapon hit him square in the chest, knocking him back. Vekar's body crumpled to the ground, his face a mask of surprise and rage. "Vekar is down," Jonas shouted into her ear. "The Ralthor are retreating." Illyria took a deep breath, her body trembling from the rush of victory. She had done it. They had done it. The Ralthor were retreating, their morale shattered without their leader. The jungle fell silent for a moment, the battle coming to an end. Illyria looked around at the warriors who had fought beside her, their faces filled with a mixture of relief and triumph. They had protected Felvora. They had won. Jonas joined her, his face breaking into a smile. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "We actually did it." Illyria smiled back, though her heart was still racing. "Together, we did." As the Ralthor ships retreated into the sky, Illyria turned her gaze toward the horizon, the sun beginning to rise over the jungle. Felvora was safe, for now. And though their battle was over, the journey was just beginning. Illyria knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone in this fight. Humans and Felvorians, together, could face any storm.